So where do people see this?
Huh?
Where do people see this?
Well, it's first of all, it's not video based. This is just so I can at some point take 30 seconds as a promo. You know what I mean? So this is just iTunes, like a podcast.
Okay.
It's just a podcast feed on iTunes.
Right.
Has like 100,000 people checking it out. It's crazy. It's like of all the shit I do online, the most basic, simple, free, audio only, no video is the thing that's like the most.
So it's for free?
Totally for free, yeah. It's always for free.
Okay.
Let's just check. Okay, my mic is on. Check yours.
Hello, 1, 2.
Perfect. We have a room
1, 2, 1, 2.
All right, awesome. So it's a weird time to be in New York, huh? Right now. Shit is kind of changing rapidly, more so than it ever has.
It's a weird time, period.
Not just New York, you think?
Yeah, I think everywhere.
You just got back from the UK, right?
Yeah.
And you survived the north of England. You came out alive.
Yeah, it was cool, you know.
How was it?
It was cool. It's like, this was only the second time that I brought my band to the UK, you know, and I self-promoted the entire tour. So it's interesting, you know. It was interesting. I mean, I would say certainly the level of intensity in the UK is towards my music is higher than in the United States. I mean, London was like really amazing. I mean, you know, like we have our following and our fan base in New York.
Sure.
That is loyal, but like in London, it was like, you know, people just ate it up. You know, I mean, it was like really super intense. Like the intensity level was.
Do you get the impression that they ate it up so much more because there are less opportunities to hear that kind of music there, and perhaps the audience is a little more jaded in New York or in the States in general? They come to a gig and they're like, yeah, okay, play me something I haven't heard, impress me.
I mean, there's not a lot of opportunity to hear that type of music in New York too, you know, because we're like the only ones that kind of do this type of stuff. Sure. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I think you have to understand, like, the cultural landscape of New York and London are similar, you know, but I think in London has retained a certain vibe of like subculture, because I think simply because of the tradition of dissent inside that is always prevalent inside the monarchy. I mean, there's always someone to go and, you know, point the finger at the Queen, you know, and go like, you know, fuck this, you know. So it has tradition, I think. So like being an underdog is a British thing. I think for that reason also, I believe rock and roll really is British music and not American music. Although it generated from you know, the originators of rock and roll certainly come from the United States, it's British music as far as I'm concerned, because, you know, like, you know, the most important rock bands were all British. Yeah. And I think that, you know, that kind of like reflects that sentiment. So as opposed to New York, that has been like now gentrified to the max, you know, really, I mean, what has been happening over the past 2 decades, you know, I mean, like with Giuliani's regime, well, certainly he made the city safer, you know, but it's also culturally New York has flatlined a couple of years ago, and the reason for that is quite simple. It's because the 1%, you know, once the city has been cleaned up, you know, and you didn't have to be concerned to be mocked on your way home. The 1% started to come in here and invest into like the real estate. So
you think artists got priced out of the city?
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, I mean, just the fact that like the 1%, or actually the sons and daughters of the 1%, are coming to New York because it's hip. And they come here to consume the mythological atmosphere that was created in the last century by a group of forward-thinking, idealistic artists, musicians, and writers. And those type of idealism is no longer sustainable unless you have rich parents. So in effect, the cultural output of New York City and Williamsburg, for that fact, or Brooklyn, resembles the former output, like Jaws 4 compares to the original.
Yeah.
So it's no longer happening. I mean, it's a real karaoke culture. You know, people cannot tell the difference between someone actually singing, someone singing authentically, someone lip syncing, and it's not just that they are not able to tell the difference. They don't care. And I don't think that the city will be able to give birth to anything new ever again, unless the whole thing just completely falls apart. You know, then we create a situation like, you know, of West Berlin when the wall was still up. You know, then it became like this cell of creativity that was isolated from the outside world. But yeah, and New York is also turning into a ghost town because a lot of people who own real estate here don't live here anymore. You know, you would turn, I mean, more than once, you know, I ended up in some place for an after party at 5 o'clock in the morning, you know, at Natasha's or Ahmed's place, and it's literally like an empty $4 million loft condo with a futon and a suitcase, and I don't live here. I come here twice a week for Fashion Week. It's my dad's.
Yeah.
So the people don't contribute as far as art anymore. I mean, there's tech companies who like source their talent here, and they live here for 3, 4, 5 years, and then they move back when their kids have to go to school. Then they move back to North California. So I think that's the fate of New York. I mean, it's still a magnificent structure, but it had its day when it comes to generating new culture.
Do you feel there's a particular, like a nucleus, a central location of where that culture is being created now?
Well, no, yes and no. I mean, if you look at pop music, for instance, you know, you would have to look at a place like Reykjavik. You know, all these new rock bands and pop bands, they all come out of Reykjavik, which is a really small, isolated place. Yeah. Because in Reykjavik, it's like, well, people don't really, you know, the premise of being able to make a living as a professional musician is so small that people don't even bother about that. So they play the music that they like, yeah, not the music that they believe has a marketplace. And there's this isolation and those, you know, extreme, you know, daylight environment where, like, in winter it just gets dark. Like, you need a purpose to do something, so they create music with integrity. So, you know, all that new stuff which is coming out of a small place like Reykjavik, and I think that's a template for the future. That, you know, you can't really stop human creativity, but it will not have this critical mass that assembles in one particular big city, you know. So I think New York, London, Paris, I mean, Paris has been dead for, I don't know, 20 years, has not rendered any significant output, and New York has not rendered any significant output for, let's say, maybe like 10, 15 years. Mm-hmm. London is still happening, you know, but it's a matter of time. So, you know, people go to like Berlin, but I don't really buy it. I think it's a lot of hype. It's just a cheap place. So I believe the new locations are going to be microscopic little cells in small towns, like, I don't know, Lyon or Dusseldorf or Luzerne, or, you know, like off the beaten path. Yeah. Where, you know, specifically
European.
Well, it could be also Detroit. For, you know, I don't know. I mean, some of the more interesting stuff that is generated
Because we were talking before I started rolling, and you asked me how much of my work is done in the US, and I said 0 in terms of live work, and that's just been like a decline since I've lived here. Like, it started off pretty healthy. I would play in the US quite a lot and do cross-country tours and all this kind of thing, but it's just the last 5 years completely disappeared. Do you find that with Nerve as well? With your band?
Well, yeah. I mean, John and Aaron and Jacob, they run the Bunker Studio, so they have that's their day gig.
Right.
I mean, I do a lot of other type of stuff. I mean, in my entity as a famous drummer, I do those things,
right.
Like around the world, but we don't play in America so much, really. We play more in Asia and we play more in Europe. I mean,
what do you feel the biggest difference between an Asian and a US audience is, for instance? Because I know you've been going to China a little bit.
Well, Asia
and Japan more.
Well, Asia is really, you have to differentiate. Asia is basically Japan and the rest.
Because Japan is such a different culture, right?
Right. I mean, Japan is a very high, sophisticated, opinionated audience, which is kind of cool, in Japan, what's interesting, people in Japan are really into it, which is something that is not happening here anymore. People are not into anything. It's really superficial now. And they're into it, they're completely, no matter what it is, but it's just they're into it, and therefore it creates a high level of quality, with whatever, with the food, with culture, with fashion, with so that is interesting. The rest of Asia, of course, is you pretty much enter a third world country. Where you deal with limitations, economical limitations, and there's not really a development of real culture. I mean, China is a false economy. So you play for a very small selected club that wants to spend money somehow. They already have a Ferrari and they already have Gucci clothes, and they were like, well, what else can we do with our money? Well, let's build a jazz club, and they don't really know what is going on for the most part, and, not to say that there is some cultural intelligence in like China, but it's microscopic, but it exists, it's in Beijing but you have to go out of your way and you can find it. But otherwise, the rest of China or the rest of Asia, more or less, is a smooth jazz audience. They like that. Like they're not concerned with like the cultural occurrences that concern us living.
So they're 15, 20 years behind, and they're okay with that certain comfort level and no interest in breaking through any barriers.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's just weird, if you play in Indonesia, then you play in a jazz club in front of, 50 people that pay like $100, which is, probably like twice like the monthly income of like a worker. So it's kind of completely disjointed from reality, and it might be like a tax write-off for the for the corporation that runs the 5-star complex resort hotel, which is adjoined to a supermarket or a shopping mall where you can buy Armani and Louis Vuitton. So it's more of that. It's not really.
Do you
real?
Still remember the time, if there was a time when you were growing as a musician and wanting to be a part of the generation ahead of you? Did you ever experience that, where you were in your late teens or early 20s but had this thing of like
ahead of me, like
playing with your heroes, playing with the people that you listened to?
Well, of course I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my interest in that being, I think most people do, because they get inspired by whoever it is, Tony or whoever the guys are, drums, bass, whatever it is. But the most interesting thing to me about that is, do you remember when that became a non-reality when you cut that off and was like, okay, I want to invest more in my own peer group and my own culture and my own thing?
You know, you got to choose your battles somehow, you know. And for me, it was like, you know, my personal biography, I think, which is kind of similar like yours. I mean, we're kind of like outliers in a way, you know, like kind of we're like kind of self-taught, you know, and you know, we grew up in a different environment, you know, like
perhaps.
We kind of had like hippie families, you know, and my dad was a jazz musician. That's pretty unusual. And you know, I was traveling around when I was a kid a lot, like relocated a lot.
Yeah.
And so I feel comfortable at the fringe of things. So I probably artistically naturally gravitate towards the fringe and the outlook that the fringe has, which is not the center. So of course, you know, you learn from your heroes and you want to be a part of that, and then you go to it, and you know, as you get older and wiser, you start to understand that it comes with a price, you know, that you have to cater to the past. You know, that comes with some sort of like an oxymoron. If you go like, oh, okay, well, I want to do what like Jaco Pastorius did or Tony Williams. So these people broke with tradition. They came out of tradition, but they broke with it and they created something new. Now, let's say when it comes to jazz, I realized very quickly when I arrived in the early 90s that I came 40 years too late to accomplish that. You know, like those role models, those figures, those forward-thinking people, they were dying. You know, Miles died, passed away, Jaco passed away, Gil Evans passed away, and the legacy that they left behind was not happening. You know, it was not happening. It was
because it was a lot of copycats and a lot of people just trying to do what they did.
Well, at some point, you know, jazz was generated from like radical people, and it was listened to by radical people. And now jazz is played by conservative people, and now jazz is also listened by conservative people. You know, you're not allowed to change anything, and it becomes academic, like unlike, you know, or like 100 years ago, you know, after Stravinsky and we had the postmodern composers, where like the classical music became academia, and you know, people in the laboratory started to try to find solutions for the new music of the 20th century. You know, like Stockhausen and Webern and Berg with like 12-tone music, and it was very interesting. The interdisciplinary quality of it was like immense, but they were stuck in academia, and it was people like Fletcher Henderson and Louis Armstrong who kicked open the door and find the solution for the musical tsunami that happened in the 20th century. You know, it didn't come from classical music. Classical music was pretty much stuck 100 years ago and didn't really go anywhere. You know, and now jazz has been in that position for the past 50 years, you know, and so, you know, without a doubt, the first 50 years of jazz were more, you know, I mean, compared to the first 50 years, the second 50 years of jazz were kind of like pathetic, you know, I mean, but what an incredible art form this was.
Yeah.
So at some point, you know, I came to the conclusion, say, well, if I want to be a part of something new, I have to emancipate myself from this and embrace the real tradition of jazz, which to me, Miles Davis really nicely articulated. You know, like he, as I can recall, Miles said, jazz is not a style or a rhythm, but it's the art form or the self-expression of creativity and innovation as it relates to the time we live in, you know, and that responsibility people in jazz have not taken upon, you know, they have neglected this responsibility. So those things move on in different places, you know. Of course, there's, you know, like when someone like Kendrick Lamar, who I consider to be exceptional, you know, when he starts to collaborate with like jazz musicians, then everybody in the jazz world like drops dead and go like, oh yeah, this is the see jazz is not dead, you know. But it's really not like that, you know. And I think you have to look at the whole thing. You know what, like at some point I started to understand, like I have to look out for the next generation, because I became aware that my generation really are a bunch of losers culturally, you know. Like they inherited a legacy from Hendrix and the Beatles and Miles Davis and Coltrane, and what did they do with it?
Did nothing with
they
it.
Made like Berkeley School of Music. You know, they didn't pass on this fire to the next generation.
Yeah.
So I started to understand, well, okay, they're just concerned with like the gig, not with communication, not with art. And this has left us the legacy of the skeleton of the music industry that is no longer existing really, but it's just an echo or a phantom from the last century.
Yeah. When you were kind of transitioning from doing like, for want of a better word, fusion gigs and pop gigs and the stuff with Michelle, for instance, and moving towards doing your own thing at where was it, Shine? Or
yeah,
like late 90s, right? Do you remember being fearful at the time? Was there an element of fear, or was it just...
No, actually, not at all. No, I was so obsessed and driven and passionate about this idea to create something new, you know? And I still am.
You think that was the key to the success of that party?
Yeah, that was the key. You know, on like once you know, at one point I saw, like, I understood like the element of freshness, you know, that I heard in the music of, you know, Thelonious Monk, or, you know, like, or what I loved about jazz or rock and roll, you know, and I discovered that in electronic music, you know, or in some electronic music, and the idea to express that or have an ability to create something new with this was, you know, eclipse everything else. I mean, it was a lot of legwork.
Yeah.
A lot of legwork, and most people didn't understand it. And actually, most people still don't understand what it is that I'm trying to do. I mean, get like, whoa, well, I really like Jojo. He's such a great drummer. I just cannot fathom why he would play such crappy music that has no melody and no harmony, and they don't really understand what it is that I'm trying to do. They cannot follow because they completely stuck in old aesthetics, and they're not able to shed those aesthetics. But, you know, it's still not easy. I mean, you know, I'm being nominated, and like, which is very flattering, of course, and, you know, let's say like, you know, modern drummer, Reader's Poll. Now I'm being nominated again in the category of best fusion drummer.
Yeah.
I guess just for the lack of like,
a lack of a better label.
You know, where else could they nominate me, you know? So
it'd be amazing to see a category in any of those polls, in any of those magazines that said musician. Well,
yeah, you know, you kind of have to rethink this whole thing, and I think this is the key, you know, because we can lament and you know, cry our hearts out, you know, how bad things are, but, you know, we also have to kind of like try to create solutions, you know, and like for me is, you know, when you address fearfulness, and you know, I'm not without fear, but I'm trying to put it in its place and try to understand where it generates from. You know, and fear is absolutely, it can be a drive for like creativity. And I work with a lot of people that are whose primary fear, drive is fear, and disregarding on how talented or successful they are, it's usually a pain in the ass to work with them. You know, and then there's people which are driven by love and curiosity and gratitude about the position that they're allowed to be a person that is creative. You know, this is a privilege. It's a privilege. You know, you have to be grateful to be in that position. And what you do, you communicate and you work and you try to express what you believe in is right. And you don't make amends to some storefronts for bullshits. You know, like a lot of great, you know, things that were great ideas at one point, like jazz or rock and roll. Fantastic ideas, fantastic ideologies, fantastic concepts. They are now storefronts for bullshit, and unless you recognize that, and you refuse to waste your talent, you know, or your gift for this, we're not going to proceed into this next thing. You know, we're going to be waiting for the next Bob Dylan or the next Hendrix forever. Yeah. And they are all amongst us. You know, there's great guys. You know, I mean, you know, like James Blake, for instance, and is exceptional musician. You know, exceptional art. It's great. You know, I mean, there's people around there. So what I will say, you know, I mean, to, you know, put that very complicated subject into some sort of like maybe a helpful analogy, which I've been trying to do for myself to deal with this anxiety and fear. Yeah. I mean, we have to understand, like, you can't have when it concerns the outside world. I'm not saying the inside world and, you know, the inner peace that you can have, but the outside world. Yeah. You cannot have the cake and eat it.
Right.
So on one side you have security, and on the other side you have freedom, right? Now, what we see right now, like, people are so scared that they sacrifice freedom for security, and that's a recipe for disaster. To say the least, it incapacitates any growth, cultural growth or new culture.
Yeah.
You know, you cannot create anything if you're too scared to take up on the risks that the freedom demands of you. You know, you will not discover new continents if you're too scared to lose sight of the old shoreline.
Yeah.
So I think that's, you know, you push that boat into the ocean and you have faith that what you believe in is right. And I think it's not tolerance or anything, or I think it's only reason about, like, you know, that you feel, oh, okay, there is this fire, and then what is this thing that I like about Mozart, yeah, or Ellington or Gustav Mahler or Hendrix or the Beatles or Aphex Twin, or, you know, what is it that I like about this? And then try to find that within yourself, you know, and then nurture that flame and express that through your art, and because that will inspire the next generation. This is something that the generation that came before me has not really done.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I'm trying to do this, you know, and trying to create magic, because there's no more magic in music. Or in popular culture music, there's no more magic really. It's all bland and everything sounds the same. And there's a reason for that. And to maybe put one more analogy into it, I think the reason for this, and also the reason why people are scared right now and run to embrace the wrong prophets to kind of like get them out of this mess, is, and, you know, I don't have, you know, I'm not a sociologist or anything. I just think about this a lot, and as an artist, I believe we feel things before they manifest in society, or before they manifest in science. Art is always first. And I believe that the protocol of industrialism or industrialization, which is about 200 years old, is at the end of the rope because technology develops at the incremental speed. Mm-hmm. So industrialization relies on planning, and planning relies on prospection into the future. Now, back in 1985, the future was still 15, 20, 30 years. Now we cannot even prospect 3 months from now. We don't know what type of world we were. Right. So, which means the protocol of industrialization is out of the window. And the people who call the shots right now are stuck, are being held hostage by this protocol because this is the only thing that they know, and their existence and their purpose relies on upholding this outdated protocol. Like a monkey trapped inside a monkey trap, this like little ball, a box with like a nut inside, and they cannot pull their fist free because the hole is too small, and they don't realize they need to let go of what keeps them trapped in order to pull themselves free. So that industrialism protocol that is connected to our greed and materialism and ultimately capitalism, is coming to its end. Yeah. So I think that the new way is not planning, but preparing to improvise and reclaiming the human ability to be creative on the spot. And this in jazz is one of the most powerful ingredients to really to improvise, not just to shed scales or whatever, or but to be able to deal beautifully with unforeseen and maybe cumbersome situations. I think that is what I'm trying to communicate, and this is what I believe is important right now.
Do you think it's the healthiest time in terms of communication and what's available to an independent artist such as you or such as me or such as so many people out there? Do you think it's actually the healthiest time? I mean, you hear so many people talking about how the music industry is dead because they're thinking of the music industry in the context of the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, and they're not admitting what technology is affording us to be able to do now. Do you see it as a very healthy time as a band leader and as a composer and as an improviser to be heard and to be able to find some level of success and communication with what it is you want to do? Do you think it's a very healthy time right now?
Well, I mean, this is like a really big one, and I'll probably talk out of my ass if I would get into it too deeply. I mean,
you said you self-promoted your most recent tour, for instance.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had to self-promote it because.
But had to. That's really interesting that you say you had to self-promote it.
Okay. I had to self-promote it, and it panned out. I mean, we sold out our shows in London. But okay, to be fair, I have the opportunity to do that, because I have money and I have a certain reputation. I don't have to start from scratch. Mm-hmm. But no matter what, like Fletcher Henderson situation, he had all the odds against him, and a lot of these people that created great art. And I think this is one of the things about, great art happens when you have the odds against yourself. Mm-hmm. If that wouldn't be true, then rock and roll would have never happened.
Right.
It's against doing something against the odds, and with the idealistic point of view to create a better future, more just future. I mean, it's all about the basic values. It's all about curiosity, compassion, all those things, courage. And I would say, it's like you need some sort of like rewards every once in a while. You know, you cannot go forever without something from the outside, you know. But I kind of like learned to be more appreciative of, like, you know, anyone who would share his time to listen to my music, because, you know, when we're going to arrive in like a time where we're like 70-year-old men are going to water ski with 18-year-old models in virtual reality, when this becomes the pastime, then a genuine human being who's going to listen to you with the genuine concern about what you have to say is going to be a very precious and a very rare commodity. So I think with all the technology, we have to understand how to use it, because right now we're being enslaved by it. You know, I don't believe technology, you know, virtual artificial intelligence is not around the corner. I think it's going to take a couple of 100 years, or maybe even 1,000 years. It's probably going to happen at some point, you know, if we don't destroy our kind before, you know. But I think, you know, nobody's really concerned with like the risk that he's taken to surrender everything he is to all those platforms, you know. I mean, with that, big data is a big problem, you know, and I find it very disconcerting that people are not more concerned about it. This could be something that, like, within no time could be a serious problem to our civil liberties and our abilities to create, you know. So whatever it is, I mean, the social network gives me the independence to promote my own shows without a record company that otherwise will tell me what to do, you know. So this is good. This is good. Once again, you know, you have to choose your battles. But what I feel, what is nice, I mean, I've been doing what I do for like a very, very long time. I mean, you know, I was not the only one. You know, there was a handful of people that started this thing about 20 years ago. Like, you know, myself, the Anthony Parks. You know, there was a couple of people that branched out, drummers, and we're able to do what we do, which is a big reward. I mean, you know, I won't be driving a gold-plated Bentley anytime soon, but that's okay, because I precious the validity to have the freedom to create the music that I believe in. And I don't have to make any amends. You know, I have the luxury to turn down as many gigs as I have to. You know, I think last time I took a gig because I had to, that's like maybe 18 years ago. You know, so I had a good fare about that. Yeah. And it's nice to see that it has an effect. You know, I can see the DNA of what I created being reflected in, like, you know, David Bowie's last record. I can see this record would sound different if I hadn't done what I did. Or I got a really very kind message a couple of weeks ago from Brian Eno, who wrote to me that what I've been doing has been very influential on him for the past 3 years, and that his upcoming project is profoundly influenced by what I've been doing with Nerve. So, you know, to coming from him, you know, that is a compliment of like the highest order, which is very, very motivating, you know, and go like, okay, I wish there was more people in Sheffield at our gig, but we're gonna come back, you know.
Yeah. Awesome, man. It's always so good to talk to you, man. And
yeah, thanks for giving me this platform.
Time, man. Yeah, always. You're the man.
Thank you, sir.